Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's Impact webinar, Why Before Wind, Unlocking Australia's $1 trillion wind opportunity through transmission. My name is Kayla, content producer at the Leader Associates, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. Australia has enormous wind energy potential, but unlocking it depends on one key enabler, a strong, future-ready transmission network. It's not just about generating power, it's about providing affordable, reliable energy, creating jobs, and positioning Australia as a global leader in renewables. Federal programs, state renewable energy zones, and larger-scale storage lay the groundwork, but making it work requires collaboration between policymakers, developers, grid operators, investors, and innovators. Today, we bring together leaders from the federal and Western Australia governments, Transgrid, Western Power, Equus, Australia, and the Clean Energy Investor Group to explore one central question. How can we build a transmission system that will unlock Australia's $1 trillion wind opportunity? Throughout the webinar, please feel free to share your insights by the chat box. The webinar is also part of the Digital Content for Australia Wind Energy 2026, a critical platform where industry stakeholders can exchange insights and forge valuable connections. Today's webinar is closely linked to the Wind Grid Transmission Forum, one of the key sub-forums at Australia Wind Energy 2026. Key industry leaders from the Australia federal and the state governments, as well as Big Grid, JERA NextBP, AJL, AusNet, RWE, and Engine, and many others will be in attendance. We also look forward to your participation. Without further ado, let's dive into today's agenda. We will begin with an interest on the enabling wind-driven transmission, policy investment, and grid readiness in Australia, addressed by Scott Maxwell, Acting Branch Head of Clean Energy Investment at the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment, and Water. Scott, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Yes, I am Scott Maxwell. I am the Acting Branch Head for Clean Energy Investment in the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. This branch is looking at kind of what the Australian government can do to help enable the physical infrastructure that's needed to transition the grid. And kind of, I suppose our kind of signature programs in that regard are Rewiring the Nation and the Capacity Investment Scheme, which I will talk about shortly. If we just go to the next slide, I thought I would just kind of start with a little bit of scene setting, coming from the kind of the national Australian government. I'll definitely kind of be giving that kind of national perspective. I know you've got people who are going to present from a more state-based perspective, particularly from the Western Australian perspective. There are four main grids in Australia. I will be kind of focusing in this discussion more on the national electricity market. I know you will have people to talk about the other kind of next largest grid, the Southwest Interconnected System. The national electricity market is one of the world's longest kind of interconnected power systems, 40,000 kilometres of transmission lines, supplying around 23 million people. So because of a lot of Australia's legacy energy assets like coal-fired power stations are increasingly unreliable and are scheduled to close in the coming years, we are looking to renewable energy as the lowest cost and lowest emission replacement for these assets. So on the next slide, the Australian Energy Market Operator develops a roadmap for the transition of the national electricity market every 2 years. And it's called the Integrated System Plan, and I've included some information here about it. So the Integrated System Plan identifies the optimal mix of generation, storage and transmission infrastructure needed to transition the NEM to a reliable, secure, and affordable low emissions system. And that's in alignment with government targets. So, 82% of renewable energy on our electricity grid by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So the 2024 ISP, which is the most recent version of that document, confirmed that as coal-fired power stations retire, renewable energy connected with transmission and distribution, firmed with storage and backed by gas powered generation, is the lowest cost way to supply electricity to homes and businesses through Australia's transition to a net zero economy. So just some kind of facts and figures. So the 2024 ISP said that the optimal development path, kind of the projects that are needed, will deliver 22 billion in net market benefits. It said that we would need to build 4,581 kilometres of new transmission lines to meet 2030 targets. And it also identified or shortlisted 43 renewable energy zones across eastern and southeastern Australia to support the approximately 127 gigawatt of utility scale variable renewable energy forecast under the central step change scenario. So if we just go to the next slide, this talks more about kind of wind specifically in the ISP. The 2024 ISP showed that wind would be around 70% of the newly built utility scale renewables between 2025 and 2030. And made the very good point, of course, that wind and solar are complementary. That build out, so the ISP step change estimated that we would need 6 times the current renewable capacity to reach kind of 99% of renewables by 2050. So I think what's clear from this kind of market modelling, such as the ISP, is the value of wind to the system. And, this is, of course, stuff that people listening in here will know, but like wind blows at different times and in different places, including evening peaks, and it tends to support smoother prices compared to solar. So if we just go to the next slide, this kind of story from the ISP, now there's going to be a new draft 2026 ISP in the next kind of week or two, which will kind of update some of these forecasts. So what we've seen is that the projects that are under development for delivery in the medium term, so we kind of say that's kind of the next 3 to 7 years, there's a similar capacity of onshore wind to utility scale solar with a significant pipeline of battery projects. Now, not all of these projects will come to pass, but we do know that kind of wind, there are some challenges to developing wind, and that, solar and batteries is proving a very popular and kind of cost-effective kind of project suite. It will be interesting to see what the draft 2026 ISP says. Like I previously showed what the 2024 ISP showed. I think it's expected that wind will make up a reduced but still critically important share of the new generation. And whether that's something like, wind and solar kind of in a 50-50 kind of ratio, we'll just have to see when the document is released. But so AEMO does kind of identify these kind of transmission projects, and they're based on renewable energy zones. It's kind of important to say, while most capacity lies within these zones, there is significant capacity being developed outside of these zones, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria. I might just jump to the next slide, which talks now a little bit about the kind of Australian government perspective and the kind of programs and kind of roles that we kind of have in the energy transition. So, as I mentioned previously, the Australian government's goal is to increase the share of renewable electricity in our grid by to 82% by 2030. And according to AEMO, renewables powered 43% of Australia's electricity grid in the first 3 months of 2025. So we are investing as a country billions to upgrade, expand and modernise our energy system to unlock greater penetration of renewable energy, accelerate decarbonisation and bring down electricity prices for households and businesses. And kind of to achieve this, the Australian government is managing kind of national energy policies and delivers programs that are central to meeting these targets and addressing the key challenges facing the transition. And that includes, as I mentioned before, the Capacity Investment Scheme and the Rewiring the Nation programs, which both sit under the Powering Australia plan. So I think just on the next slide, it kind of will step out those programs and policies. So both the Capacity Investment Scheme and the Rewiring the Nation program provide the Commonwealth with levers to reduce costs associated with the energy transition, noting, of course, that those costs are passed on to Australian energy consumers through their bills. And we're also looking to, where we can, help align timeframes and approval processes and provide certainty to investors in this kind of ever-changing industry. The other thing that we always stress is that kind of communities and kind of stakeholders and kind of local communities are at the heart of the Powering Australia plan. Through the Capacity Investment Scheme and Rewiring the Nation, we are looking to foster and enable greater social and economic benefits for all Australians, requiring that developers demonstrate meaningful engagement with local communities and First Nations people and support local procurement and employment. I might just now jump to the next slide, and I've got some information here about the Capacity Investment Scheme, the first of the kind of two programs I'm going to talk about. So the Capacity Investment Scheme is a revenue underwriting scheme to accelerate investment in renewable energy generation, such as wind and solar, and clean dispatchable energy, such as battery storage. The scheme provides a kind of long-term revenue safety net that decreases financial risk for investors and ensures more renewable energy projects get built. We are, as we've kind of said, the SWIS will deliver at least 40 gigawatts of new renewable and clean dispatchable capacity to fill emerging reliability gaps, and kind of renewable capacity such as wind and solar and clean dispatchable capacity such as batteries are being supported by the scheme. If we jump to the next slide, the Capacity Investment Scheme has completed 4 tenders to date, which supports 65 projects, totaling 13 gigawatts of renewable energy generation and 5.4 gigawatt 4-hour equivalent of storage capacity, with an additional 15.2 gigawatt hours of storage capacity to be delivered through hybrid generation projects. So of these, of the 39 generation and hybrid generation projects, 15 are wind, and that totals around 6.6 gigawatts of generation capacity and an additional 1 gigawatt hour of storage capacity through hybrid projects. So if we just go to the next slide, the slower deployment of wind generation compared to solar and battery technologies is a growing challenge, and is partly due to things like delays in planned transmission upgrades and planning approvals. In July 2025, the Capacity Investment Scheme target capacity was uplifted from 23 gigawatts to 26 gigawatts of renewable generation capacity, and from 9 gigawatts to 14 gigawatts of clean dispatchable capacity. The uplift was helped by the falling costs of solar and batteries, and the additional generation capacity uplift will underwrite the additional generation required for solar given its lower capacity factor. And the additional dispatchable capacity will support reduced curtailment across all generation types and strengthen system reliability. What we're looking to as the kind of the Australian government is, what are the kind of practical initiatives where we can help as the Australian government to help address project blockers. So we've listed a few of those here on this slide. So we have the National Renewable Energy Priority List, which is projects on that list are able to have kind of a streamlined process through the kind of Commonwealth or Australian government environmental approvals, a faster kind of yes, no decision process for these priority projects. Renewables Environmental Research Initiative is looking at ways to improve that environmental assessment process as well. And we also have the Australian Energy Market Operators Connection Reforms Initiative, aimed at improving the speed, efficiency, and time certainty of the connections process. So with that priority list of the National Renewable Energy Priority List. We have 56 kind of priority renewable energy projects on that list, including generation and transmission. And priority projects are getting this kind of coordinated support through planning and environmental approval processes. And it's important to note that more than half of the generation projects on that list are wind projects. So, and this is something that we're very cognizant of, that it's really the wind projects that are really benefiting from that kind of support. If we jump to the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit about Rewiring the Nation, which is our other kind of marquee or kind of flagship program. So we've allocated more than 20 billion to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to help deliver this program. Basically, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation has a Rewiring the Nation fund that invests in new transmission lines to deliver affordable, reliable, renewable energy to cities, towns, and regional communities. So through this fund, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation is investing in upgrades, expansions, and modernization of the electricity grid to unlock renewables and storage capacity and drive down the costs of transmission costs on energy bills. The way this is done is that the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, or CEFC, provides finance at concessional rates to minimize the cost of these investments. And this then lowers the cost to Australian consumers. The program is designed to accelerate the delivery of these kind of critical transmission projects, the ones that are necessary to ready the grid for the uptake of renewable energy. And to date, the CFC has invested around $7.4 billion into several projects. So most recently, they invested in the first stage of the Marinus Link project, which is connecting Tasmania and Victoria. They also invested around 3.5 billion in projects in New South Wales. So this includes the Central West Arana Renewable Energy Zone project, the Victoria, the VNI West project, and the HumeLink project. So we're working with state and territory governments as part of this program to fast track the energy transition. To date, we've entered into agreements with several jurisdictions, and I've listed them there on the slide. And if we maybe just jump to the next slide, I can talk a little bit in more detail about just exactly how the program is structured. And I apologize, there's a lot of information on this slide, but basically the program has an overarching goal, which is that Australia has a network infrastructure to support an affordable, equitable, and reliable renewable energy transition. And we have really two objectives here. I'm not going to read them out in total, but the way they kind of boil down is reduce costs for projects, which means less kind of reducing costs for consumers, but also deliver infrastructure quicker. And they're kind of a bit mutually reinforcing, right? Like there's a hope that like if you deliver the projects quicker, that will also have a positive effect on the cost of the project and the cost that's ultimately charged or recovered from consumers. So as I mentioned before, the CFC making investments through the Rewiring the Nation Fund is a really critical financial lever. We also have a special account in our department to also provide financial support to network investments through equity, concessional debt, or underwriting or indemnities. But what's important to also focus on is we also have these kind of regulatory and policy levers. As part of this, we've been kind of progressing key regulatory and policy reforms to remove barriers to project delivery. So that's basically, it could be through like proposing changes to the national electricity rules. And there's been a few examples of that, like the enhancing community engagement rule change, the financeability rule change, and the concessional finance rule change. And this is kind of like this kind of policy regulatory work, kind of which sometimes is a bit longer term, kind of sits alongside the kind of the financial kind of levers and investments that we're making to hopefully be able to drive those two objectives and the overall program goal. So I think just kind of to sum up a little bit, we're committing to working collaboratively with all of our kind of stakeholders. We're continuously trying to improve how we're delivering these programs and trying to kind of fix and work and kind of make them as impactful as possible. And feedback is essential to this process, and we also welcome ideas on how we can do better to kind of strengthen these initiatives and make sure that they're doing the best job that they can. But I might stop there. I realise it's been the full 20 minutes, and I'm of course happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your insightful presentation, Scott. And on your slide referring the 2024 Integrated System Plan, we see a much more wind-heavy outlook shaping Australia's future generation mix. How does this influence Commonwealth thinking on transmission planning and the prioritization?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The important, I think we see wind as critically important, and enabling it through transmission is absolutely critical. I think we've definitely seen that there are some challenges, and we've kind of been definitely working through some of those. I think there's sometimes kind of a chicken and egg question around like making sure that, because you're essentially wanting the wind generation and the transmission to kind of be kind of coordinated, and be available and ready at the same time. And that's definitely something that we've been kind of looking at as we've been financing transmission through the Rewiring the Nation program, and also underwriting like wind generation through the capacity investment scheme. It's definitely something that we're looking at and trying to make sure that we've got right, because you don't want an underutilized transmission line, and you don't want wind generators unable to connect to the grid. So finding that way to kind of make sure everything's lined up and built at the same time, I think that's a real kind of focus for us.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Thank you for your answering. And what do you think as the key challenges in accelerating transmission delivery, and how is the Commonwealth working to address them?
Yeah, I think what we've seen as the challenges to transmission delivery, I think it's not any one challenge. I think that's probably the really hard thing. When we see delays to projects, it's normally for various reasons. It could be regulatory approvals. It could be delays in kind of the construction phase, and kind of like it could be something like, we've had kind of things like workforce challenges, we've had weather challenges, we've had COVID, we've had supply chain and logistics challenges in terms of, making sure equipment's here on time. Kind of environmental regulatory, kind of like the kind of economic regulatory challenges. Social license is another really kind of key one as well. So I think it's identifying that there are many causes and factors that we need to address, and working out how do we address each of those challenges. I would say if I had to pick one, the one that seems to be kind of most kind of present at the moment, probably is the kind of the mixture of like social license and environmental regulatory challenges, and sometimes they're related as well. So yeah, I would probably point to that one, but there are many challenges at the moment.
Yeah, thank you again, Scott, for taking the time to share these insights with us. And there are still some questions in our Q&A box. We would appreciate it if you can address them. Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's now shift to Western Australia. Our next keynote speaker is Ms. Winona Hallingham, Director of Planning and Coordination at Department of Energy and Economic Diversification. Today, she will walk us through the SWIS transmission plan and the policy vision underpinning Western Australia's energy transition. Hi, Winona. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm just,
Hi.
Oh, here we go. You're going to share for me? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kayla, for that introduction. I work in WA government doing energy transition, and I want to talk to you today about a plan that we've recently released, the SWIS transmission plan. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm meeting and which you're on today. For me, it's the Noongar people of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I'd like to pass on my respects to elders, both past and present. Kayla, Fiona, can I get you to flick to the next slide, please? It's just the acknowledgement of country. Thank you.
Thanks for the moment.
And then please then to the next slide. So if you remember back to Scott's slide, he had the first slide he had was a vision of all of Australia and the networks in Western Australia, as well as the NEM on the east coast. So the main grid in Western Australia is in that southwest corner of the state, and the SWIS. And in the SWIS, renewable energy was around 38% in 2024. This was mainly due to the rooftop solar PV, but wind is now becoming an increasingly large share over time as well. So we are seeing now over 40% of households have solar PV, and the state has a battery rebate, which is leading to not only batteries being installed, but also larger solar systems. So we're expecting that to continue to grow. While we're on this slide, I'll just point out too that coal is a declining share in WA, and state-owned coal-fired power stations are scheduled to be closed by 2030. So that will mean that share continues to fall. So if we go to the next slide, we can see then what's happening with demand. And like other places around Australia, and I think Queensland in particular, and over the last summer, peak demand in particular has been increasing very fast and very rapidly. Back in 2016, we had a peak over that 4,000, and then that wasn't really hit again until 2023. And then since then, we've had huge peak events, and with the peak in January, the 20th of January, I think, climate change is really coming to hit. In WA, we had Geraldton had a maximum, which is in the SWIS, had a maximum temperature of 49 degrees. So it was really hot, and we're expecting that to continue. So if we go to the next slide, we're putting those two together. We've got the demand growing, and we've got coal coming out and other gas retiring. You can see that there's both a challenge and an opportunity in Western Australia. So we've got demand increasing steadily, and then the bits of expected capacity retirements, as you can see. So, so far so good. We're meeting that demand, but there will need to be significant investment, both in transmission and in projects, to ensure that coal can be smoothly phased out in WA. Now, if we go to the next slide, this steps us through the energy system planning that's been happening in Western Australia. So in 2020, we had a whole of system plan, which is the equivalent of the ISP in the NEM, which provided a 20-year outlook. We followed that then, things were changing quite significantly with demand increasing. We followed that with the SWIS demand assessment, and really that set a vision of what the scale of the investment could be under some different scenarios. Government then committed to build a Clean Energy Link North to ensure that projects could be have some certainty to progress. And then we also identified some areas within the transmission infrastructure plan of 2024 for further investigation. Then that further investigation led into the SWIS transmission plan. So this provides a blueprint for what investment is needed over the next 5 to 10 years. If we go to the next slide, the SWIS transmission plan has 3 phases, and I'll go through those phases in detail. But it is a kind of a blueprint for building the grid to retire coal under phase 1, and then to support economic growth and decarbonisation under phase 2, and then that expansion of green energy opportunities through SIAs in further phases as well. So as well as having the different timing phases, there's different types of transmission that are included in here. We've got the links that collect renewable energy. We've also got significant links that enable the transfer of electrons around the SWIS area, around the metro, and also links to improve the capacity of the strategic industrial areas to support new green industries. So if we go to the next slide, I'll take you through a bit of the detail. And I should actually give a shout out here to Western Power. So Western Power was our partner in developing this plan, and Western Power planning engineers are the ones that we can thank for the good work of the SWIS transmission plan. And I know Carla's on the panel later, so she is kind of very close to the detail of this plan as well, so can perhaps answer any questions in the panel session too. So phase 1, as I mentioned, is all about coal retirements, and you can see the picture of the SWIS on the left hand side of this. So you can see it's just in that southwest corner of Western Australia. So that line up to Three Springs, that is some of the best wind in the country, that line. We have some existing wind farms there, and this strengthening will enable transfer capacity of at least another gigawatt, as well as deconstraining some existing wind farms that are currently constrained. The other key part of phase 1 is building to the east of Collie. So Collie is where the coal-fired power stations are now that will be retiring. So there's a really strong network in that Collie region, and also a diverse wind resource. So it makes sense and there's some really significant scale wind farm proponents that are developing projects in that region. So it really makes sense to kind of have wind in different locations, geographic locations, for diversity, and also to make use of that existing infrastructure. You'll also see the locations of those strategic industrial areas that I talked about, and they're to the south of Perth. So having that diversity also helps get those electrons to where they're needed. And if we go to the next slide on phase 2. Thank you, brilliant. So phase 2 looks at the period beyond 2030 and what investment may be needed to both connect more renewable energy, but also then transfer the renewable energy around the grid. So it builds on the investment that's being made in the north to enable further 1,600 megawatts of transfer capacity around that area in the north, and then also builds on the work that's being done in the east as well. These are at fairly early stages, but we are looking at ensuring that work continues, the planning work continues, and Western Power's been funded to do that over the next few years. We also have some other networks that I mentioned in terms of moving the electrons around parts of the network, so around Perth and from Collie up to Perth. If we go to the next slide, phase 3, we know that more is going to be required. So really phase 3 is that period beyond 2035. When we have a clearer idea in the next few years, we'll have a clearer idea about some of the technology pathways for major industry in WA. WA has the lines, like an oversized share of hard to abate industries. So there's a lot of industries in the southwest that use gas as a direct feedstock. And so being able to decarbonise those industries will will potentially require significant new renewable energy. So once we have those pathways, we will really be able to ensure not only that we can supply green exports to the rest of the world, but also that we can decarbonise existing industry in WA, or in the southwest. Now, if we go to the next slide, not only do we have a plan of where the transmission is going to be built, but the government's really keen to leverage the government ownership to maximise local manufacturing opportunities. So there's expectations of higher content, and that's being delivered through ministerial directions to the GTEs to ensure that local businesses are supported to bid into the contracts. And then there's also separate support for transmission manufacturing in WA, given the importance of this of the new transmission build, both in the SWIS and the Pilbara, to the WA economy. A request for information was put out to industry to ensure that we can that government can deliver this in a way that meets the needs of industry. Community at the centre is really a surprise for no one. In WA, we have been setting up a new entity called Powering WA, which is really designed to assist communities through this transition. So it works with proponents, it works across government and with communities to ensure that the transition is smooth. We are really keen that we support communities to not only get opportunities through the development of transmission and renewable energy projects, but also support them to get lasting benefits from the transition. And we know that when you don't have community support and social license, and Scott was mentioning this as well, that things can take longer. So that's a large part of our work too, to alongside of the delivery of the transmission infrastructure in the SWIS transmission plan. If we go to the next slide. So what's next? Western Power is getting on with the planning and delivery of phase 1 projects. That's going to continue at pace. So that was that Clean Energy Link North that I mentioned, which is on track for completion by December 2027. And then that Clean Energy Link East, stage 1, which is around mid-2029. And then we have the 2027 WASP. So this is our ISP equivalent that I mentioned, and that's going to inform the timing, and we're working very closely with Western Power on this and AEMO. That's going to inform the timing of phase 2 projects and phase 3 projects. It'll also, so we've locked in, we'll lock in our WASP phase 1, and then it will help us refine those phase 2 and inform phase 3 projects. Western Power will continue to do the detailed planning for phase 2 to support their timely delivery. And then, as I mentioned, Powering WA and Western Power will continue to engage with communities and traditional owners. We've been going out into the community with this plan and talking to both local governments and communities about what it will mean for them, which has been fantastic. So working together with Western Power on that, and it's really important part of the delivery of this infrastructure is ensuring that communities have information and have somewhere to go to ask questions. And I think that's the end of my presentation, but I just want to finish by saying the importance of a plan for supporting projects to get to have the confidence to continue to develop their projects to get to financial close. So I think having a plan has been really important in WA, and really well received by proponents here. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, Kayla.
Thank you, Banana, for your insightful keynote and a clear overview of WA's transmission strategy. And you noted that phase 1 delivery is continuing at pace. Could you share what factors are guiding how phase 1 projects are sequenced and prioritized?
Yes, so I think a key part of the factor will be demand growth. So that is like a big swing factor. If demand continues to increase, the pace it's been increasing. And if we have a decision about an electrification pathway that increases demand or a new industry coming, then that is going to, I think, bring forward investment in those in some of those areas, and perhaps bring some of those phase through projects further forward. On the other hand, if we have demand slowing down, or if we have like an upsizing of DER, then that might slow down some of those investments. So I think demand and what's happening in the DER space will be really important. But I think there is the core part. It will be needed under all circumstances.
Thank you. And now we will transition directly into our panel discussion, and WindNova will also join us along with other speakers to explore the opportunities in building a wind-ready grid across Australia. And first, let me introduce our moderator, Mr. Paul Beaton, Policy Manager at the Clean Energy Investor Group, who will guide our panelists through future-proofing Australia grid, planning, innovation, and storage for a wind-powered future. Paul, I will give you the floor to introduce your panel members.
Okay, thank you, Kayla, and many thanks to Scott and Winona for those informative and engaging presentations. Hearing from Scott on how important federal policies are and trying to work to crowd in investment for a resilient and future-ready grid in the NIM states. And Winona, thanks so much for giving us this overview of the plan to deal with that rapidly increasing demand peak that's coming in WA, especially in the SWIS, and of course, the plan to retire the coal and need to fill the gap, and the importance for investor confidence, which is a lot of my current concerns, having a plan to help give that. And of course, really want to look forward to building on both of those with this panel, including how social license is related, what might come out, and how that can be supported through policy and technology. So I'm pleased to moderate this panel that will be covering planning, innovation, and storage, and how those contribute to a wind-powered future. And before we jump to the panel, I also want to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people here in the Melbourne area, and offer my respects for the elders here and across all of Australia and the Torres Islands, and really reflect and appreciate their care for country. I take it as my own inspiration for working in this industry where we try and care for country through our work. And we'll also just note that here in Melbourne, of course, will be where the Australia Wind Energy 2026 will take place. And thank you for Kayla for that introduction. I've had a privilege of working in many aspects of the industry through my working career life in industry as an entrepreneur, and policy in various roles in governments and think tanks, alongside investors, and now very focused on investment. And I know from all of those just how important transmission is for the industry, for having it undergird the entire economy, but also for actually encouraging and bringing in innovation and investment to actually undertake an energy transition. And underpinning those, of course, is policy, innovation, and technology. And so I'm excited for this particular panel that's going to focus on those in our aspect or our context, meaning, of course, planning, innovation, and storage, and how that's going to help have a wind-powered future. And so with that, I'm happy to kick off. Maybe I'll call on each panelist to introduce themselves and offer about 2 minutes of introductory remarks. And so Winona, I'll start with you. You may not need to reintroduce yourself, but maybe if you want to build or extend past that nice presentation you gave with a couple of introductory remarks, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Yes, so Winona Haddingham. I won't reintroduce myself, but I will say, as well as the SWIS, I have, and Paul has mentioned this to me before this, have been working previously on the Pilbara as well. So that's something that I'm really keen to chat about today as well, about the opportunities, not only in the SWIS, but also in the Pilbara, where there's, a huge decarbonisation task ahead, and also the opportunity for new green industries. So I work at Energy Policy WA at the moment, leading the planning and coordination area, but have previously worked on that Pilbara area too. So I'm happy to chat about that a bit later, Paul.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Winona, and definitely, the Pilbara is important for so many ways for WA and for the whole country. Next, I'll ask Robbie Ahern, General Manager of System Resilience at Transgrid. Robbie, think you're on the line.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much, Paul and Kayla, and beyond for the invite here to speak today. My name is Robbie Ahern, the GM of System Resilience, as Paul mentioned there. In Transgrid, we're the transmission network service provider for the state of New South Wales and ACT. Like Winona said there, she's worked in different parts. I've actually previously worked in Ireland and Northern Ireland for 20 years on their energy transition. Moved down to Australia there about 2.5 years ago to work with Transgrid on the implementation of our energy transition here in New South Wales. Focus a lot on digital tools, system security, and I suppose that challenge between operations and planning, increasing focus in that area as well. But really able to use the experience of having worked in Europe, which maybe in some ways was I would say, a little bit ahead of where we are here in Australia. But I think now Australia has caught up and in a lot of ways is very quickly moving beyond, given the scale of the transition here. So thanks very much for the invite.
All right, thank you, Robbie. And maybe go next to Carla Basden, Head of Major Customer Decarbonization at Western Power, speaking of the Pilbara.
Yeah, so I look after all of the customer connections to the grid in the SWIS, as Winona mentioned. So that's all of our transmission customers, generators or loads. There's also a big sort of pace in the distribution transformation space, and the sort of large projects sit in my space. A really key part of my role at the moment is making sure that my customer connection pipeline has a pathway to connect through the activated SWIS transmission plan. So while we've got the funding to support the development of future transmission investment, we really do need to make sure that the proponents that are developed and where they're located can actually connect into that infrastructure.
Very good. Yes, connections always so important. And I know our last panelist, not to be forgotten, Ed VL, connections are your jam. You head of grid connection, director of grid connections at Equus Australia.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, hi. Good to see you all. My jam is around connections. It's a mixture of technical and regulatory work that I do. Much like Carla, my mission is to get as many of our connections in place. We have a large portfolio here at Equus for battery and wind and the such. And yeah, I'm excited as much as everyone else here on the panel today in relation to having more transmission in Australia, and keen to contribute into the discussion. Thank you.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you all for taking time today to join us and offer your thoughts and expertise. So I thought I'd start with just a broad question. As complex as a grid is, and the whole electric power system, and essentially the fundamental basis of our very complex economies, I'm still curious. Give your thoughts on if you could change one thing, like there's one problem to solve or one challenge you could surmount that would get more wind power brought into Australia. What or the particular area you work in, what might it be? And I might, Carla, might kick off with you if you've got some comments on that.
Well, I think it's it's been already mentioned, but I think the fact that, a lot of these wind projects are still sort of chasing financing and trying to get to financial close. So I think, if it was my dream, we'd be marrying up all of these generation projects with load customers. And because without that sort of relationship and that signal, it's very difficult for these projects to progress. I think similar to that, we have the SWIS process, the capacity investment scheme, as well as our AEMO reserve capacity processes. But, they're in really short term. So they're sort of looking, 2 years out or so. And I think having some, signals of confidence for projects that are on the horizon of those would potentially mean that they could activate sooner. It is a challenge, and often we'll get projects that are almost ready to sort of get their access contract to connect to the network, but they just don't meet that financial milestone. So yeah, really, that would be the dream for me. Everyone's got a PPA.
All right, makes sense. Getting the investment timeline and the the market timelines aligned. Thanks so much, Ed. How about you?
Yeah, we're all here on a mission for more transmission, but as well as more transmission, I think one area I would like to see tackled would be the the duration of grid connection approvals in the wind space, and in particular the impact that that has in negotiations with turbine suppliers. So today, with sort of 12 to 18 months grid connection approval processes, it means that we need to select a turbine a lot earlier than financial close, and by having to do that, we sort of lose a lot of the commercial leverage that we have with the turbine suppliers, and therefore the project loses its competitiveness, and it's hard to get PPA, and it's ultimately is a more expensive project that turns into higher prices for consumers. So if we could shrink that duration to a much smaller period of time, we'll be able to have negotiations that are more competitive with the suppliers, and sort of only have to select a turbine and a supplier a few months before financial close, as opposed to 18 months before. So to me, that is one area that we should really look at. And I know AEMO has attempted to solve that by having a software platform for consultants to go and test their models and do some work pre-submissions. And I think that's definitely worth looking at again.
Understood. Yes. And I mean, I think this is, in addition, we're all looking at transmission here, but I think we're all thinking about what is the end result, right? We're looking to see the transition go along, but also bring about lower prices for the customers ultimately. So yeah, more competition will hopefully support that. Robbie, might go to you next.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm going to, given I work for a transmission company, I probably will just look at it from a transmission perspective. Like, I do think there's no silver bullet, unfortunately, for the energy transition, and there's an awful lot of different challenges that we have to work through and collaborate on as an industry over the next decade and beyond. I think like social acceptance, supply chain is a big challenge as well. Getting all the people that we need to do what needs to be done. A lot of focus for me recently has been on regulatory approvals and the RIT framework, for example, for new projects. And I think really, given the pressing need of change, the speed of the change that's happening at the moment, anything that we can do to streamline and work to accelerate those particular approvals can only really help benefit the energy transition, allow us make that change more quickly. And also, for example, around that supply chain, one thing we're aware of is that we're part of a global energy transition. There's an awful lot of different parts of the world that are looking for the same type of infrastructure as we are. So the more we can stay ahead of that wave, the better it will be for people here in Australia. Yep.
Pick up the pace. Definitely heard that, Robbie, come through.
Yeah.
And you can, yes, things are moving fast, and we need to move along in that pace. And then Winona, I think you may have laid out some of it, but if you could shrink down to, if you could only have one, what might it be?
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to agree with Carla. I think PPAs are the key to getting projects. We've got a plan now for the grid. Carla's busy helping connect the customers. We've been working on approvals and timeframes for approvals. So really just PPAs. We've had a few private people organisations issue PPAs to renewable energy projects recently, but we need both government and private sector to do more in the PPA space.
Got it. Yes, and it's often right. It's so important for projects to get those PPAs to anchor and get investors interested, right? So they have some sense of confidence in the return, and then everything else gets a lot easier from there. I hear you on that. So Winona, while I have you on the line, I wonder, you gave us a nice overview of the SWIS transmission plan that's going on, and mentioned, of course, that you're involved in the Pilbara. Do you want to maybe expand a little on SWIS or not, but also maybe bring in how it does or doesn't work with the Pilbara Energy Transition Plan, maybe some overview of that one and what we might expect and what it means for getting transmission in? Sure.
So they're very different. So the SWIS is more like the NEM in terms of an existing network that's got a regulatory arrangement around it, whereas the Pilbara has a light touch regulatory arrangement for a number of privately owned networks that are loosely interconnected. the Pilbara itself has around over 40% of WA's emissions. Decarbonising the Pilbara and growing industry in the Pilbara will require significant new electricity, renewable energy. At the moment, there's only 2% renewable energy in the Pilbara. The other factor with decarbonising the Pilbara is that the wind is not ubiquitous. It doesn't blow everywhere, and you've got, especially around the key iron ore areas, you don't have great wind resources, which means that you can put some solar near the mines, and you can, to a certain extent, but mining projects, they want to reserve areas with ore underneath for future. So if you put panels on top, then you are kind of making it more difficult then to get that ore at a later date. So you can put some solar panels on, but very quickly you get to a point, and we've done a number of studies that show that there's real value from building common user transmission infrastructure in the Pilbara, and enabling the existing miners as well as new industries to connect to that and deliver really good quality renewable resources from areas kind of just around that Pilbara region. So the government's been facilitating this because there's a number of private parties, and it's going to be private sector led. But the government's been working, Scott mentioned the Rewiring the Nation, and working closely with the Commonwealth to ensure that there is a pathway for supporting proponents to deliver transmission infrastructure in corridors. So we've done 4 priority corridors have gone out to market, and they're being progressed at the moment. And I think the latest update on that is that the state government's working to execute the priority corridor agreements with proponents before the end of the year. There's other work streams around regulatory arrangements and around ongoing electricity modelling. Engagement with traditional owners is also very important. But everyone's kind of got behind this idea of common user infrastructure, or most players have got behind this idea, and now government is playing a key role in facilitating that in the Pilbara.
Great, thank you, Winona. That's really interesting, and I imagine this will be. I mean, you said it's really quite different from having the organized market and SWIS, and probably a whole swath of different challenges you laid out there. So
yeah, that's right.
Ripe for innovation, both in technology and policy, as well as social approach, perhaps. Thank you. So might switch over to Ed for a moment. Ed, I'm wondering if you might, just from your point of view as a developer, especially in connections, as you mentioned before, just give a sense of what is the importance of getting more augmentation, expansion? What is that going to have? What kind of impact does that actually have on development of wind? Maybe flesh that out for us a little bit. Especially I'm thinking about the investor confidence again, right?
Yeah. Look, when you look at a wind development, and in general any renewable energy development, there's really 2 main areas of focus when you're starting to develop a project. One is the development approvals, and that goes on to community consultations and traditional owners relationships. It goes to your environmental plans, etc. And that's quite a well-established body of work that developers will do. The second area is the grid connection, and I know that SWIS, but also other developers have got portfolios of projects in Australia today that are almost without exception affected by the lack of grid infrastructure available, or lack of clarity as to how to get to a grid connection. So having more transmission, having it within the right timeframes, will no doubt unlock a large amount of new wind generation. And I think investor confidence comes from clarity. It's an area that of the grid connection. It's an area that suffers sometimes from complexities, but those are sort of things that you can work with, and investors are quite happy to take on the challenge. But not having a grid that is accessible, or not having clarity as to whether there is a path to it in terms of access rights and the like, then that's what causes a bit of hesitation from the investment world in terms of really committing to these projects. So to answer the question, it's a huge aspect of wind development, that of having or not having a grid connection.
Yeah, it's so important, right? I mean, I think we're all feeling that's probably why there's such a great attendance for the panel today, that gap between the amount of transmission infrastructure and network capacity available and just how much that bogs things down. Of course, that's investors looking for return. It's always a concern. And I wonder, it's probably a good segue to Robbie to ask you, maybe give your view from being inside one of the TNSPs. You're focusing on resilience, but also innovation. And I know this is all directed toward actually getting it built. I wonder if you might give us a sense of what you see on the horizon coming down to help support you and the whole team at TransGrid of making Ed's life easier and investors more likely to invest on the transmission side.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of innovation happening at the moment in the sector, which is, it's an incredibly exciting time to be in it. It's challenging, it's not easy, but it's definitely a really good place to be. A bit of a shameless plug, we have a demand management innovation allowance. It's a $5 million program that we look to go out and partner with external parties around that are in that kind of prototype to pilot phase of projects. So we're looking to seek to partner with interested parties at that at the moment. We're out there looking for people to put forward proposals. So programs like that are really important. But maybe bringing it back to innovative solutions that are, very much live today. I think I look a lot at system strength and how that space is evolving. And some of the innovation is using old technology like synchronous condensers to provide that base level of system strength. We need to have a safe, operable, stable power system. But what's really exciting is the work that we are going to be doing in the next number of years around grid forming inverters, a lot of grid forming batteries as they connect onto the power system, and where they also can provide system strength as coal retires. So huge amount of innovation happening in that space. You taking an old technology and giving it a new purpose, but also working really with external parties on the very cutting edge of how transmission networks can evolve. We're also doing a lot of work around the digital side of things in our control room. We're seeing a tremendous amount of, we've gone really from a very centralized power system, very predictable coal plant. Now we're moving to a very regional, dispersed power system, weather dependent, wind and solar, lots of more participants than we're probably used to. So we're doing a lot of work in our control room to make sure that how all that information is brought back into the control room is very easy to understand, that they can operate a very complex system and also maybe operate it in a more proactive way. And maybe just to talk about innovations then to help speed up, infrastructure delivery. Look, we're looking at very practical things at the moment. So for example, we're using drones for asset inspections that can really help speed things up. We're looking at how we can use helicopters and AI as well to speed up, for example, patrols of existing transmission lines. So an awful lot of innovation happening at the moment in all different facets of the transmission network. But I think we need to look at all the different facets as well, because again, to use the phrase I said, there's no silver bullet here. We have to move everything along to, I suppose, make the necessary improvements and enable this clean energy transition.
Indeed, no silver bullets, and I really appreciate the multi-pronged approach you're taking and the complexity of it. And I appreciate you playing along with my squeezing you earlier to ask for one, even though there's obviously much more than one. And Carla, I might turn to you now. Speaking of more than one, there's lots of things I know you're trying to juggle with your work, and I'm just thinking about planning. I wonder if you might give us a sense of how Western Power is approaching the scoping and planning of new transmission infrastructure that will support new connections.
Yeah. So, so the SWIS transmission plan, as Winona mentioned, is our blueprint for future transmission investment, in the SWIS, and it really does set out the timing of that investment, over a horizon by project. And so one of the key inputs to that SWIS transmission plan was obviously the locality of customer projects, noting that, there's no point building transmission if you're not going to connect customers. Really, the way that we approached our scoping and planning was quite different to what's happened over East. So as opposed to the sort of renewable energy zone res model, where, we build a transmission line and then, tell proponents and developers, look, you'll need to go and get there. We've seen some struggles of how that's played out over East, and my nightmare is having transmission bills and no customers. And I don't think anyone wants that, given that we're trying to really support the state's WA state's outcomes in terms of coal retirement. So what we actually did, and so the approach that we took for East as an example, is we needed a new terminal, and that's in a regional area. We looked at the readiness of proponents in those areas and the timeframes for them to connect. And we ultimately identified, 2 customers which we thought would be connecting, on or around the time that we could deliver the infrastructure. So we did a desktop assessment and looked at different sites. And then instead of just going and sort of picking one and progressing it, we held a series of workshops with customers to actually show that and share all of our land mapping, share our GIS files, share customer sentiment and land agreements and stakeholders and environmental surveys, to actually sort of say, look, how does this work? Can you sort of get there? Because we don't take over that, that customer approvals part stays with them. So those workshops actually resulted in us moving the terminal, quite further east to where we originally planned. But where we actually landed is those 2 proponents know that they have a clear pathway of how they will connect to that terminal. We have great confidence because we've seen, their information that they can get there. And we worked really collaboratively, to the effect that we've had, 2, developers in a room together with competing projects, but actually understanding that that's the approach that we need to take to be able to get the outcomes, at a regional level and to best support the state. So really trying to do it proactively. My team, I've got a number of sort of regional lead roles that will look at each region's readiness in terms of proponents, and we'll be, and replicating that workshop approach to make sure we can get all the information we can from customers, so that when we identify what those shared solutions, those connection solutions are, everyone's got that confidence that they're going to progress.
Fantastic. I really appreciate the in-depth approach, as well as the, I don't want to say innovation, but just really making the move to get involved and almost like, some design thinking, right? Learn from your customers what's going on for them, so you can update as you go, and the effectiveness of that.
Benefits of going later than the rest of the nation. I think we got to sort of see what how things were playing out and how we could maybe help control our destinies.
Fair point. Indeed. And maybe to extend on that, Carla, I'll ask you if you want to stay on, but maybe Winona has thoughts too. Challenges or constraints that are coming up from your perspective at Western Power, like what's still on, hurdles that need to be surmounted, and that sort of thing.
So I'd probably just touch on, so I think, that rather than sort of go through all the, turbines and supply and, challenges and financing, I'd probably say my biggest challenge is still really customer readiness. So ultimately, I think, when we started this sort of journey, 18 months, 2 years ago, we had a portfolio of projects, and the access code in Western Australia requires that we progress them in the order that they apply for connection. Unfortunately, we had lots of zombie projects that weren't going anywhere. And they were actually really holding up our queue. So we actually implemented a new framework, which we call the Critical Project Framework. And now when customers apply for connection, they're tested against a series of criteria to demonstrate readiness. So in terms of land approvals, financing strategy, studies, maturity, OEM selection, just to really make sure that we are supporting the projects that are, ready to progress. So that's been a saving grace. We reassess at each sort of stage of our connections process to make sure that they're still progressing in that time frame. And that's actually helped us to really mitigate what was our biggest risk, was that uncertainty of what's actually happening on the other side. We still have the financing challenge, but again, I think, building in that relationship of sort of trust with customers, My KPI is to connect megawatts to the system as fast as possible. So we're actually shared, like we all want to connect soon. And I think having that relationship with customers so we can be really transparent and have honest, open conversations about the maturity of projects. That's really, I think, what we need to continue doing so that we all, know how we're planning together, and we have some great trust that we're going to get to the outcome that we're expecting. In terms of other challenges, just broadly, the ones that I sort of see are really OEM challenges. We've got one big market player in the state, and there's people looking at new entrants, but I acknowledge the comment about you have to pick an OEM quite early in the process, and that can be challenging to sort of have optionality. So I think in general, I think the more that we can bring resources into industry to help, we've scaled our delivery resources and we're continually building our design and engineering teams to help support that. But I think it's just that resources across the value chain is a real challenge, and I can only see what I can see and what I can control. So it's those external ones, and I think the supplier one is one we need to all watch as well.
Okay, so watch that space. Area ripe for more innovation. Thank you. And Winona, I'm curious if you had thoughts there from your perspective as well.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Yes, I agree with what Carla has said. Certainly, definitely challenges there, but I also wanted to reflect on the time frames that we have. So coal-fired power stations owned by and operated by Synergy, the state government entity, they are scheduled for retirement on 2029. By 2029, there isn't the ability to extend those out indefinitely. Like we have a finite coal resource. We have significant issues with financial viability, so we can't kick that can down the road. We can't kick the coal can along a bit further. So I think that is we're going to have a crunch. I think we're going to have a real challenge, not only connecting enough projects, but getting the parts through the ports and up through the road network to site. We are going to be really struggling to and working. We're planning it out bit by bit now so that we can do it, so we can deliver it. But we're going to have to micromanage this delivery of these projects by 2030. So it's just that time frame, that really tight time frame that we've got to get everything done, which is kind of the big challenge for me at the moment. We're really we're up against it, I think, but we like a good challenge, and I'm Powering WA is working across the whole cross government with all of the entities to ensure that we can do it, but it is going to be the time crunch will be tricky.
Sure, definitely hear you. I mean, everyone's feeling the time pressure, but I guess it's really quite heightened given the constraints that are present, right, in SWIS for SWIS.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Thank you for that. So I might just ask a couple more questions, and then we'll turn to some of the audience questions coming in. Ed, coming back to you, right, and you laid out so nicely, and I think building on the presentations earlier, the importance of having more transmission and what that will do to unlock investors getting interested in projects because they can actually get connected. I wonder if you just might give us a sense, I guess on the one hand, like what kind of scale from your perspective, because we heard, of course, in Scott's preso what AMO has been modeling and thinking about and planning, but from your perspective in the developer side, what do you think is realistic for scale? And then, as we heard from Robbie, also, there are, other ways to make use as technology innovation comes in, system strength increasing, more firming on the grid, how that might impact the scale of actual grid assets built out.
Yeah, so I think rather than attempting to give you kilometers of lines needed or et cetera, I think that the reports we see coming from AEMO and other such parties are quite reliable. I think that the extent of the need is quite clear. What is worth knowing is that from an investor viewpoint, I think that the amount necessary really is that of creating enough clarity. And as I said earlier, investors will always look for clarity for their confidence, and they need to be the challenges need to be known, and there needs to be enough information there to analyze the risks and then evaluate them, and then with that done, with that body of work done, then we know whether there is a project or not. So there needs to be enough transmission added to the current grid to create a bit more clarity around whether there is a connection or not. And it's also worth noting that it's not that investors expect a very easy ride when it comes to getting into the grid. In fact, it could be too much of a good thing. So investors don't look for easy rides. They know that having challenges is where the opportunities lie to add value to projects. So we know perfectly well that we're going to add value to our projects if we manage to go over hurdles progressively and de-risk projects. So we actually, to a sense, we want some challenges, including in grid connection. So conversely, if we had too much grid and it was so easy to get connected, everyone would do it, and all these investments will then lose value. So I think that the narrow answer to the question is that there needs to be enough there to have more clarity and to have enough information available so that we can analyze the challenges and the risks that are involved with connecting to it, but almost not too much to make an easy ride that everyone can connect, in a sense. That's the pure investment sort of view. But obviously, we're all keen to see these projects go. And as I said earlier, I think without exception, most of the wind projects that are left now in Australia have got a grid challenge. So we do need more grid. There's no question there. It just needs to be enough so that each and every one of these projects have got a clear path to connection.
Fantastic answer, Ed. Thank you. All right, so I'm just mindful of our time, and we're trying to wrap up by 1:30. So I might just look to some of the questions coming in through the Q&A. Ed, while you're still, well, maybe you're back on mute now, but there's a question first for you, but maybe we'll open it for whoever wants to chime in about why not use high voltage DC underground? And do you think that's realistic? And obviously, I'm sure, Robbie, you've got some thoughts on that, probably Carly and Winona as well. But from your perspective, looking for challenges that might add value, would that be something that'd be attractive or unattractive from your perspective?
Well, HVDC is a known technology. It's used extensively in submarine cables, for example, or any long distances. It doesn't come inexpensive. So transitioning from AC to DC and having to do that at both sides of the underground cable is quite an expensive exercise. Also, visual amenity for these converter stations is not small. So we're really there would be a number of technical, financial, but also sort of visual challenges with that sort of technology. And I think that's why it hasn't really taken off in the context of wind developments as much as it has in very long transmission lines, as I said, underground, like the bus link and other links of that nature.
Sure. I think we've known some of those, but I think it's good to think about them again, especially in our context. And Robbie, you've come from a smaller physical market to smaller physical grid to a larger one. I imagine you've got some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, actually, in my previous role as Eduardo said there, I would have been involved in the development of new HVDC circuits, predominantly between jurisdictions, so HVDC interconnectors. But in Ireland as well, we did explore offshore HVDC transmission reinforcements of the Irish grid. But that was for very specific needs. I suppose the reason transmission it tends to be overhead line, with the exception of urban areas, is the cost is number one, a very significant cost differential, and particularly for long circuits. This would be particularly a challenge for Australia, given the really significant geographical I suppose distances involved. There's also technical challenges there too, with undergrounding transmission lines, particularly AC. We're in Transgrid at the moment. We're very actively working on the development of, and in some cases constructing 2,000 kilometers of new transmission lines. So it's very significant reinforcement of the transmission network in New South Wales. It's really probably once in a generation level of work that's involved in that. And look, there's been a huge amount of work and thought into what's the best way of doing it. We have projects going from essentially the border with South Australia all along the Victorian border and then right up to Queensland. And some of them are in construction, others are not quite as advanced as that yet, but there's quite detailed plans being developed on them. So, but yeah, I suppose really the main reason around transmission AC not being underground is costs, and there are also real technical challenges. And this is something I've had lots of thoughts and conversations and answered many questions on when I was in Ireland, and that European context. But it's the same principles apply really here in Australia.
And it might be worth adding that storage. We haven't really touched on storage much, but it's a great enabler of more wind connections, especially now that grid forming is quite established. Storage tend to have underground connections as opposed to overhead, because the distances being much shorter between the facility and the existing grid. So most of the developments in the storage space have actually got connections that are underground.
Yeah, and I should say I'm talking about the transmission network, whereas Eduardo, you're talking about the grid connections. Yeah.
Indeed, and you're right. And we haven't talked as much on maybe storage as maybe we should have. But maybe it's actually worth opening up, because I'm curious, especially thinking about differences between NIM is multi-state, right? Whereas everything in WA is actually sub-state, if you will, right? It's smaller than the whole state of WA, and and I'm guessing, right, SWIS is in the business of putting up some storage or getting involved in storage as well as generation. Maybe I'll phrase the question like this: like, what excites you? Like, what do you see, between now and 2030? We've seen this, rapid increases both in build out in the NIM, and also, of course, the way that I was looking at the quarterly energy dynamics from AMO recently, of course, seeing continual increases in the use as well as innovation in the, I guess, a business model, if you will, for running them. But what do you think is coming down the line from your own wish list?
Look, we're excited about all projects really, but it's storage is clearly a platform we have developed to a good extent now, and it's very mature. That's what we'll be focusing on. But wind is also come up markedly in the last couple of years for us. We keep our eyes open to anything really that helps get lower prices for consumers. So solar hybrids arguably coming back quite strongly. It makes so much sense if we can combine the two during the day. Makes so much sense. We can learn from the work that we're doing in the storage as a standalone to use that in hybrids. So look, there's no real silver bullet that says that's definitely the next thing that we will be chasing, but certainly areas like hybrids and the like.
Yeah, got it. And maybe to build on that, I'm curious. Carla Winona, certainly heard the challenges with the miners in the Pilbara of got too much solar or footprint, possibly losing the mining resources there. I wonder, is there any thinking in the plans right now, or just looking at technology? Like, obviously, there's some pretty large batteries that have been put on the SWIS. What do we think we might see more on the SWIS as well as in the the Northwest? What's possibly coming down the line?
Yeah, sure. Carla, do you want to take it first, or do you want me to?
You go first. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I think what's interesting is that the Gen Cost modelling was always pointing to an increase in solar battery hybrid happening around the 2030 mark. And we've actually seen that playing out in reality, with the cost of wind projects increasing a little bit, and solar battery, and particularly battery costs coming down. So I don't think we've seen, and Carl will be able to give a good sense of like the pipeline of projects if that's changed, but we have seen a few more come through. Certainly the ones that are most the most numerous projects are the wind ones, and they're the most developed. But I think we are seeing that kind of people looking at solar, and certainly in WA, it does, like when we do the modelling, you need to optimize modeling is a mix. It can't just be wind. It's got to be the mix of wind, solar, and battery all together in different locations. Like that does give you the best outcome in terms. And WA doesn't have pumped hydro, so we're kind of in a state where we must try and maximize the renewable energy diversity, if you like, so that we can maximize renewables in the system. We're lucky we've got gas. We can firm with gas, but we really need to ensure that we've got a mix of renewables firmed by batteries. But I'll hand to Carla to talk about specific insights into what projects are coming through the pipeline.
Thanks, Winona. So when I mentioned that we have criteria that we apply to determine whether we think projects are sort of credible and ready to progress right now, we have about 15 gigs of projects. So actually a huge pipeline of credible projects. In terms of proportion, about 51% of that is probably wind. And then we've actually got about 20% BESS in that pipeline. What we're seeing more than often now, though, is hybrid projects. So whether or not they're adding a battery initially coupled with solar or wind, they're usually planning or anticipating that as a second stage. So there's a bit of gas in the pipeline, not really any standalone solar. Again, it's all sort of coupled with batteries. And I might also note that, while we have so much onshore wind to connect, I think there was a question in the QA about offshore wind. So our focus is on sort of connecting the projects that we're having such a huge credible pipeline onshore. We're building out the transmission. There's just not enough signal to need offshore wind in the short term.
I see. Got it. Thank you for that. I appreciate the in-depth explanation or answer there. So noticing the time, I want to wrap up things. I always like to wrap up panels with sort of maybe a fun one, and I'm going to go as you're ordered on my screen. But the fun one is, something hopeful or something interesting that's coming down the line. What makes you excited about your job in getting transmission up so we can have a wind-powered future? And I'll start with Robbie because you're the first on my list from my screen.
What gets me excited? I think the challenge for us all as members of the industry is huge. I mean, there's obviously the decarbonisation challenge, but I think what really gets people motivated as well, and I know what drives people on Transgrid as well, is the scale of the challenge too. From it's got a technical dimension, a commercial dimension, a regulatory dimension, policy, social acceptance. It really is a challenge of our times, and that's something that really motivates people, certainly from a Transgrid perspective. And we're at the moment laying out what 2035 could look like. We're doing that within the business at the moment, but you can see clearly it's like there's so much change, such a big challenge ahead. It's a great time to be in the industry.
Fantastic, like a good challenge. Ed, up to you. What's exciting or what's hopeful or exciting here? Your choice.
Exciting. I think so I'm with Robbie. I think it's the level of opportunities that is in front of us. There are challenges, and by all means, transmission is one of them. But there's opportunity for good work to be done and good investment to be deployed. There's a large amount of projects that can be put in place in Australia. We are just at the sort of starting phase of the transition. I know we've been wanting to do it for a long time here in Australia, but we're really kicking it off now, and there is plenty more to come. I think what excites me and Equus in general is really the level of and amount of opportunities in front of us where we can really get stuck in, solve issues, de-risk projects, moving them along, and yeah, there's as Robbie says, there's a lot to be done, and we're very excited to be in the middle of it.
Nice. Winona, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to reflect on some of the exciting things I've seen in the regions in terms of partnerships between proponents and communities and First Nations people and the outcomes that people are looking to achieve and those lasting benefits that are kind of going to really support, stable income in areas that are being impacted by climate change and they've got dwindling populations, and this is really an opportunity for a diversification of that local region's the businesses there. Big opportunity for communities and big opportunity for proponents to get projects done quickly and get project and have a kind of be secure with the community being on board. So I think there are big opportunities in those partnerships.
Yeah, so much opportunity in partnership. Thanks, Winona. Carla, you get to have the last word. Bring us home.
So as someone who likes to set a vision and believes that sort of vision, setting a positive vision can make things happen, I'm excited about when we retire the state-powered coal-fired stations in 2030, that all the lights stay on because we've connected all the renewables to our new transmission grid. And we've done it while working with community and proponents to have really great mutual outcomes.
Fantastic. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to thank all four of you again, our wonderful panelists, for your contributions and our participants for joining us today, and hand it back over to Kayla to close out the webinar.
Thank you, Paul, for hosting this excellent panel discussion, and thanks also to our distinguished panelists, Winona, Robin, Carla, and Eduardo for their valuable contributions. Thank you. Yeah, and that brings us to the end of today's session. A huge thank you to all our speakers for sharing your insights, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. And a reminder that the recording and the short recap will be shared within a week. And if you have any comments, please feel free to drop me a message at the belong contact. And furthermore, I would like to remind you that today's webinar serves as a virtual preview of our in-person event, Australia Wind Energy 2026. This event is scheduled to be held from July 8th to 9th in Melbourne. This is a key opportunity for industry stakeholders to exchange insights from valuable partnerships and close major deals. We hope to see you there. And thank you once again. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your participation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.